Okay. I think we're good.
Okay. Hold on, let me check. I just got an announcement. Yep, I did. Okay, hold on. That's on my phone. Let me check.
Well, sorry, folks. Technical difficulties. So usually I try to have a nicer background than we have at the moment. So getting started from scratch. Getting started from scratch kind of involves a little bit of planning, which most of you have likely tuned in with some of that in mind. And to that end, I think what you want to be mindful of is full sun and well-drained soil. So full sun and well-drained soil is pretty much about 80% of your overall success. With that in mind, the full sun and the well-drained soil, we'll break those two down and go kind of piece by piece through those. All of the other things that we'll talk about are, again, ideals for you to shoot for, but on the kind of being mindful of fitting all of these kind of things into your circumstances. And what I mean by that is when you're looking at the area that you're looking to plant in and you don't have full sun, all you really need to consider is there enough? And anywhere from 4 to 6 hours is what you're going to want for the herb plants. On the herb plants, they're about kind of that 4 to 6 hour range on a few things. And then other things are your larger range, your basil, things like parsley, things like cilantro. They're going to need a little bit more sun to be successful. So let's start with oregano, thyme, rosemary, and sage. Those ones are the ones that will take the lowest amount of light. And then from there, if you're happy with the return on investment, you can kind of branch out. Basil, parsley, cilantro, dill, those kind of things that need a little bit more light to grow. So if you don't have full sun, it's not a loss. It's just being mindful that you might not be able to grow as much as someone that does have full sun. The other thing to consider, what to plant in. So raised beds, containers, in the ground, just taking a plot of land, digging up the grass and kind of taking it from there. So again, the full sun and the well-drained soil are your two major components. And then after that, it really is convenience. It's best to set it up as conveniently as you can, which hopefully will allow you you're cutting on it, using it, because the more often you're cutting on it, the more often you're out there looking at it and seeing if you've got bug problems, if it needs to be watered, if things are going great. So nice thing to consider is, making it convenient for you, because that's kind of how it rolls. Drive-through banking, fast food restaurants, convenience is very nice. If you can set it up conveniently, the nice thing is you're out there and using it and seeing it and enjoying it. The more often you're actually enjoying it, the more likely you are to expand and to do more. So with that in mind, on your deck, on your patio, by your front door, containers work nicely for that because, they're quite nice to look at. And then you've got plants in there. And then also it puts it nice and close to your hands to use. So a nice little deck rail right by the grill on the patio out the back there. So start small and be mindful that, there'll be a few bumps in the road. Gardening is work. You're going to sweat and get frustrated. But as far as actually starting out, really a good thing to kind of as you plant, as you care for it, as you prune it, and as you water it, a good thing to be mindful of is, tend to the plant as the plant needs it. Often we've got a list of things to do. One of those is watering. A really good habit to get into, however, is actually checking on a few things first before you go ahead and water your plant. So looking at your plant, making sure it's not just dry on top, but actually dry all the way throughout the soil. So it almost always dries out on top, but actually for it to dry out all the way down the bottom really does take some doing. And with that in mind, containers are a little easier because you can dig down into the container, into the side. You can also obviously in the ground, dig down as well. But being mindful that as you're looking at your plants and as they're obviously growing and all, and you're enjoying them, watering is a pretty good key, and that lends to the drainage, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But as far as the plant goes, the more exercise that plant is, the more it has to root out, the more as you grow and it roots out because it's drying out, making sure it actually gets that water. The more your plant will obviously come across nutrients naturally, and the healthier it will actually grow. So being mindful of the watering is good to check the actual soil to see if it's dry. Obviously your weather conditions too. A plant that's somewhat dry on a 50 to 60 degree day, really not going to dry out all that much. A plant that's dry in the morning on a 70 to 80 degree day, that's going to dry out obviously through the day. So good idea to go ahead and water in the morning. The other things to consider on the drainage side, so whether it be a container or in the ground, all of your herb plants, your vegetable plants, what else? We have citrus, even the flowers that we have pollinator flowers and hummingbird nectar plants and so forth. All of your plants are going to want drainage. And the quicker that they cycle from dry to wet, get watered, and then dry back out again, the quicker that cycling happens, the healthier those plants are going to be. So with that in mind, a really good potting mix. Potting mixes are pretty light and fluffy. They will dry out quicker, but much healthier plants for that because of the drying out process. Again, if your plants sit in water, they really just kind of sit there. They don't root out as quickly and as vigorously and as strongly. So bear in mind, kind of as you're looking at the watering is really a key component. And to make it easier on you, the more drainage your soil or your container mix has, the healthier those plants are going to be. So raised beds, whether they be an elevated bed on legs that you have on your deck, or whether it be raised beds that are on the ground at ground level. Obviously, if they're up off the ground, you don't have to do the bending over, you don't have to weed and things like that. If it's on the ground, usually you'll get more space, more per square footage for your money. You're not paying for the convenience of having it raised up. So either one, more of a soil mix, like a dirt mix, and then that's a third compost, a third topsoil, and a third sand. Topsoil and compost is usually pretty easy, fairly well known. It's the sand that's usually the curveball. Why do you put sand in there? Again, this is sand that is a nice big coarse grain, not the fine play sand or paver sand or that beach sand that's really nice and fine. You want to be mindful to get a nice big coarse grain sand, and that will help keep your soil nice and fluffy over time, and then also keep it drained and aerated as well. So quite a few advantages, and thankfully sand's pretty cheap. So, topsoil and compost you can get pretty readily. Sand is in our area here in Central Virginia. The place we go is to Pete Rose. He has construction sand, or what's also called, I think, concrete sand. So that sand is a nice big coarse grain, and even bigger grain would be better. That's a bit of a mixed grain, but that's a good enough sand, a grain of sand to get you by. So the other sand, the play sand and the paver sand, that's going to compact, and the roots aren't going to do well through there. So be mindful that you want kind of nice drainage to it, and you'll notice. So if you've been growing plants and watering and caring for them and enjoying them and just tuning in to kind of see if there's anything to glean, if you're already growing, if it's not broken, don't fix it kind of thing. If they're happy with the results, then continue on. But more so, this class is for folks that are just getting started. And it's nice to think about, you can do all the wrong things and the plants really still want to grow. Overwater it, put it in real heavy soil, put it in not enough sun. They're still going to want to grow. But you'll see a huge difference, and it's well worth the extra effort to have them thrive. With that drainage, with that full sunlight, that's really what they're going to do. And then in that soil structure, keeping it light and fluffy and letting it dry out quickly, that's more so what you're after. So probably begs the question, self-watering containers. We go back to convenience, which is what we started off with in the beginning. And convenience is very nice, but you've got to balance that with the convenience of yourself versus the health of the plant. So self-watering soils are mostly just for, selling the bag of dirt to say, we're going to fix all your problems, we'll take care of your plants are going to thrive, and then you put them in there and find out that they might not. So soil moist is like your crystals of, like your diaper crystals that absorb the water, expand, and then slowly release the water. Quite nice for some things. Herbs don't really like them. Vegetables will do okay in them. Flowers will do okay in them, more so because they chew through the water quite quickly. Whereas something like a rosemary or a lavender in a soil moist kind of product is not going to grow as quickly, be as robust, and obviously then not bloom as much on the lavender there. So with that in mind, keeping your soil aerated, letting it dry out naturally and somewhat quickly is more so what you're after. Now, if you've got that soil makeup, when you water very, very thoroughly, kind of really water it very well. And then with that in mind, again, it'll give a little more time between drying out, but that's really what you want. Is it saturated and wet, then leave it to dry out, then saturate it again and leave it to dry out. So it's going to give you much healthier plants. Other thing would be using them. So once you've grown them, what do you do with them? Well, hopefully you'll be harvesting them. And then with that drying out process, I think you'll be surprised how quickly they grow and they thrive. And with that, may create more of an abundance than you may be used to. So the leafy ones, like your parsley, basil, cilantro, chives, dill, those kind of leafy, high water content ones that dry out quickly. Those ones are good food processed in the freezer and made into little ice cube. You put the paste into little ice cube trays and then freeze that, and you've got some flavor cubes for later use. On your woody perennial kind of high oil content, your thicker stems, so think of thyme, rosemary, sage, oregano, lavender, those kind of ones do better with drying. Now, when you dry them in the house, they don't have to be basement or kind of in a cupboard or anything. You can spread them around. You want low humidity, and then you want very small bundles. And the reason you want small bundles is the bundles, if they're really thick, really big and thick, if you've got a whole bunch of rosemary, so think 20, 30 stems of rosemary, as that rosemary is drying out and the moisture, the water is coming out of the plant, that gets trapped in the middle. Whereas if it's a nice small bundle, think 3, 4 stems of rosemary, those kind of ones drying out around the house are just nice to have. Obviously the smell as it dries out, but then the nice smaller bundles will dry out a little quicker and they won't mold in the middle. So as you hang them around, obviously you want to keep them out of direct sunlight, and that will keep them looking a little nicer for you too. So other things to consider on just getting started. Think about the food that you eat, the flavors that you like. That tends to be a good starting place, especially on the herb plants, of what's actually going to work well. Really, you're investing money, and you want that return on investment as quickly as you can. You put money into the project, you want to get money out of the project. Herbs and vegetables are excellent for that. I mean, the return on investment on herbs and vegetables really is quite nicely, it's a full return kind of thing, in the sense of the parsley and the variables, the parsley, the lemon verbena, the basil, the stevia, all of the different flavors. You get some fresh mint, you put that in your water, not drinking boring old water anymore. You're drinking mint flavored water, and it's just completely natural. Just very versatile on the herbs. And then the vegetables, obviously off one tomato plant that's growing successfully, you're going to have a pretty large yield of tomatoes. So worth figuring out, worth sticking with on the herbs and the vegetables. And then as a little side note, we sell some marigolds, and they're good as a bug repellent, natural bug repellent for your tomatoes. Keep your aphids off that and your basil, and then also look pretty, but also invite in the bees, and they pollinate your tomatoes more as well. So kind of they go hand in hand, not just having a tomato plant and a bit of fertilizer, but having the flower as well to complement and kind of round out the garden as well. But back to the return on investment. So think about how much rosemary you're going to need. Think about how many tomatoes you might want. Think about how big that rosemary is going to get if it's left unattended. A rosemary plant, little 4 or 5 inch rosemary plant, gets huge pretty quickly. In about a year to a year and a half, you've got more than enough rosemary. So pretty good idea. That can go out the pot in your yard that's dry, that hardly grows weeds. That's where your rosemary, that's where your lavender wants to be. On the areas, closer to the house that are more convenient, you might want to be, planting your parsley, your basil, things like that will actually be quick in and out for the kitchen, things that you use a lot more often, and things that can really stay small. That's really the best way to get the most out of your herbs, is to keep them small, keep them cut. And then with that in mind, the more often that you're cutting on them, the more often they're producing and giving you back more herbs. That's really what you bought it for. That's what the plant's designed to do. Sometimes they actually want to bloom. So a basil is a good example. You don't want that getting very big. So a basil plant itself, you keep it nice and small. It'll look a little uglier maybe than you're used to, but it'll taste a lot fresher and a lot sweeter. It'll be that sweet basil instead of it getting really, really big, 2 foot tall, foot around. And with that in mind, it's no longer sweet basil, it's just basil. It's kind of a thicker leaf, a little bit bitter, because it's got to support all of that foliage. So bear in mind, the smaller you keep your herb plants, the more often you're cutting on them, the healthier they're going to be, the less bugs you're going to have. Bugs love that overgrown canopy of huge amounts of kind of foliage, hiding them from their natural predators and keeping them out of direct sunlight. So with those few things in mind, hopefully that gets you started on getting started. We are open at the farm here, taking drive-through orders as well. If you have plant questions, feel free to call or email. We have a growing fresh herbs at 9:30. And sorry again, folks, for the technical difficulties at the start. Do our best, and stuff is great when it works. So if you have any questions, you can sign into YouTube and you can ask your questions now if you'd like, or call or email the store. Couple other things real quick before we finish up on the getting started. Usually starting smaller is better, especially if you're just starting out. Good to get some success under your belt and have some victories there. And then as you kind of look around your area to plant, try to think about if you can maximize your space if it's a smaller area. Again, kind of whittle down the things that you're really interested in to begin with. Growing asparagus, we've got rhubarb, we've got horseradish, we've got quite a few other kind of odd things here or there. Especially on the thyme, we've got lemon thyme, we've got variegated lemon thyme, English thyme, silver edge thyme, hi-ho silver thyme, and the list goes on. So as you come out, kind of think about beforehand the things that you're going to use, the things that you're going to get that return on investment back from, and then that'll kind of have you off and running on the things that you'll enjoy, and then from there branch out. Things like stevia, stevia is fun. Using the leaf just fresh in a tea or a coffee is a nice little addition, and it grows very easily, kind of thing with everything else as well. Likes that drying out process, responds nicely to being harvested. So thinking about just starting out, try to make it as convenient as you possibly can. Try to get it close, try to be using them, put things in there that you'll use. And then the last thing is probably the feeding. I often get questions, how much do I fertilize? 10-10-10 mix, and so forth. So your herbs are quite different from your vegetables. Your herbs, though they grow pretty quickly, kind of plod along. You water it, it grows, you cut it, you water it, it grows, you cut it. So with that in mind, if it's in a container is a closed system. So it's not going to put out what you don't put in. A good example of that is a mint plant. You can put a mint plant in a container. You can neglect that thing for years and years and years. It's always going to taste like mint when you taste that leaf. If you fertilize it and water it and keep it cut and cared for, though, it will taste like mint on your palate. Your brain will obviously say that's mint. But as you do that, it will actually fill your mouth. It'll linger. It'll have a nice robust flavor and punch to it. Whereas that uncared for, unkept, unfertilized mint is just a little bit of flavor on the start and then it immediately leaves. So really that full flavor is coming from you fertilizing it and obviously caring for it with the water and the pruning. But the fertilizer turns from yucky, stinky fertilizer into actually nice, tasty foliage for you. So with that in mind, herb plants in the ground really do not need fertilizing. Now we're talking in the ground, in a raised bed with that soil blend, third compost, topsoil, and the sand. And each year on that raised bed or in the ground, you're going to just top dress very lightly with mushroom compost. And that's really all you need. In a container, again, being a closed system, it's a little bit different. We've got a fish and seaweed blend that we use. You can use anything. A low dose fertilizer is really what you want. To give you an idea, that fish and seaweed fertilizer is like a 2-3-1. So compared to a 10-10-10, it's a 2-3-1. So it's about 20% on average, the strength. And then you're only going to use a tablespoon per gallon of that. So once a month. So tablespoon per gallon once a month on your herb plants in a container, and that's really all they want. They have to have a little something, but they really don't need a whole lot. If you over-fertilize, you're going to get all this nice growth, but really not the flavor because it's wishy-washy. It's been pushed and used all that energy to grow and really not kind of plod along and set its flavor in the leaf for you. Vegetables are different. Vegetables and flowers, they're heavier feeders. They grow quite a bit of foliage, put out blooms, put out fruit, and so forth. So we've got like a chicken poop that's good for that. There's Biotone, which is an Espoma brand product. Biotone is a general garden fertilizer, but it also has mycorrhizae fungi in it, which is excellent for root protecting and development. So healthier plants for that too. So again, as we get into, tomatoes versus peppers versus cucumbers and vegetables and the different fertilizing for those, we can help you out with that. On the herb plants in containers, again, it's just that liquid fish and seaweed blend that's good for them. And they respond quite nicely. One little kind of side note, a parsley plant is the canary of your garden. Usually parsley's popular enough that most folks have it in the mix there somewhere. If your parsley is very, very yellow, and I'm not just talking the outside leaves or some of the older leaves, like predominantly most of my parsley is yellow. As long as you're not overwatering it, because it will do that if it's overwatered. It's kind of stunted. It just kind of sits there. It's very thin and kind of yellows. As long as it's not being overwatered, yellow parsley is usually an indication of a lack of nutrients. So with that, you just give it a shot of that fish and seaweed blend, and it'll perk it back up. So in the ground, if you see that, go ahead and use the fish and seaweed or some kind of low dose fertilizer just one time, and then hopefully it won't come back again. In a container, if you see it, usually you're going to see it as that month kind of rolls on into that third, fourth week. You'll fertilize it, it'll go back to green. So it's a good reminder kind of thing. And try to set your fertilization of containers maybe at the start of the month, at the end of the month. If you really like paying taxes, it's tax time kind of thing, monthly. So each time, just try to pick a pretty easy date for you to remember that you got to do this and you got to fertilize your herbs. So, if you want to not stick around, but 9:30, folks, we've got Growing Fresh Herbs where we kind of go deeper into herbs specifically. So growing in the ground, growing in a raised bed, in a container, and so forth. So again, sorry about getting a late start with all the technical difficulties, and really hope the classes are helping you out. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, we do have the other classes that are available taped for you. And I think you do the button thing, subscribe and bell and all of that. So enjoy your day. Thanks for tuning in, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.